having access to the SQL query to make a more finessed SQL statement, they can give the accounting team exactly what they're looking for without any interpretation, right? Makes it a lot more practical. And that's where I think, and in NetSuite, you have to pay extra to even get that. With Fishbowl, you already have it. Hello and welcome. This is the ILC Business Podcast, Episode 5, Fishbowl Challenges, recorded on March 1st, 2020 in New York City. Today I'm with our co-host again, Joshua Clark, in his beautiful home in New York City. This time we're meeting in the daytime, so if you hear some of the New York City music, please understand. Josh, how you been? What's going on?
I'm okay. Thanks for coming out again.
Yeah, last time I saw you was about a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
You were just going on vacation. How was vacation?
It was great. I got sick on the way back. I got pneumonia. I don't think I've ever had pneumonia before, but it seems like everyone's having it. And but I'm okay now. I'm recovered.
Yeah, you were sounding pretty rough when I called you on your first day back. I was like, oh, Josh.
Yeah.
Guess you don't want to record into the podcast.
I did a QuickBooks seminar, and it was like the day after Elton John had done a concert at Madison Square Garden, and he also had walking pneumonia, and he had to leave in the middle of it. And I was like telling the crowd of 25 people that, now I know how Elton John felt last night when he had to stop in the middle. Of course, he had 25,000 people, and I have 25. But but unlike Elton John, I actually finished the seminar. So
I'm like, oh boy.
So.
No, I know exactly how you felt because I think you got the same thing what I got back in December, early January.
Yeah.
Because I went down with the same stuff after I met with you. So maybe.
Oh no.
You had it, and then you were asymptomatic on your vacation, and then I got it. That's probably what it was.
Maybe.
Anyway, everyone's got COVID-19 flu apparently.
Yeah, right.
And speaking of that, like I was just at the hotel last night. I made a tactical error in my accommodation planning.
Yeah.
Comes to find out, I was staying at the Model United Nations Hotel where they're having their conferences that day. So it's a bunch of kids from all over the world.
China.
Hanging. Yeah, they were there too. Every country were represented. Mostly us too, like mostly European kids and kids from North America representing certain UN countries and stuff like that. So I think I had a cousin that did that once, so now I have a reason to go ping her and say like, now I know what you guys were doing. But it was traveling has its risks. So hopefully
they've been quarantining cruise ships coming in. Maybe they'll quarantine the Hilton in Midtown after
this weekend. If they do that, I want to feel really, really bad because then I'm going to be going over New Jersey and other parts of the East Coast here with my clients. So anyway, that's the reason why I'm here.
Okay.
Got a client coming up, and we're going to be doing basically a systems move where they're moving operations from one state to another, and these kind of M&A kind of activities. It's kind of have to do some of these things on site to make sure everything works and no new bugs are introduced into the system, and so it'll be a pretty busy week. I hope to be able to record a few more podcast episodes since it's just so much easier to do this in person.
Yeah.
So we're gonna try to do 2 today. We'll see how far we get.
Great.
Anyway, so let's get into the show's topic. The show topic actually came up from my wife. For those who don't know, my wife Noelle actually runs the marketing efforts for ILC, and I've been, I started the podcast, but she's helping me manage the production of it and getting it together. She actually had a really good idea, and heck, we're just gonna run with it because she's also talking to clients and she's talking to people that help us run marketing. And one of the things that they asked us was like, so what are some challenges on Fishbowl, right? No grass is perfectly green, right? So there's got to be some kind of challenges, a reason for people to come talk to you. And I say, you know what, honestly, there is. And we put together this show of the 5 Fishbowl challenges and how to solve them. And we probably will turn this into a blog post along with the podcast. Josh and I have been sitting here for a few minutes before we started, kind of going over what some of those what going some of those options could be, and we've got a few. And Josh, why don't you start us with the first one of taking inventory for granted? Challenge number 5.
Okay. So I think some people, they figure, okay, well, as long as I use a program like Fishbowl, I don't really have to understand inventory because it's going to do it for me. That's the point of a program. If I had to do it myself, what do I need Fishbowl for? The idea is, though, it's really just a tool. You really need to understand it, and Fishbowl doesn't do everything for you, and it's only as good as the information you put in. So I think you have to really respect that inventory is difficult, not Fishbowl. A lot of people rail against Fishbowl and go, oh, Fishbowl sucks, it's horrible, it's terrible, not realizing that, no, inventory is terrible. And inventory on its own is just very complex, and everything you do matters. And it's actually an option to not do inventory. If you feel like it's going to be too much work and you're not going to be 100% accurate, then it's better to just estimate and just count your inventory once a month and then do it that way. But if you're going to use inventory, you have to do it right. And Fishbowl is a tool to get you there. It's not actually going to do everything for you. You still have to be careful.
I think there's a time, either it's the transaction volume or being able to make a decision on your inventory, but there's usually that first inkling where things are becoming out of control for a company. In some companies, it's like once they cross $1 million in inventory value, gotta get a system. I think that's pretty true. But if your inventory is like one machine for $1 million, don't get an inventory system.
Right.
But if it's thousands and thousands of widgets of units of something that add up to $1 million, then yeah, you probably should do something like that. Right. A lot of the customers, maybe they don't have $1 million in inventory on hand because they turn over that quickly. So maybe they only have 300,000 in inventory. Still need a system, right? And I think for a lot of companies, a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, they early on, like I'm talking about, early days, like the first 500,000 in revenue, they're just in that mindset of I'm paying money to get the inventory, and then I'm selling it and then getting my cash back, right? And there's not really a concept of the inventory as an asset, and they don't build that expertise of being able to find, what works in a process or doesn't. So I want to add it to this point is that a company should have a way to tell if a process stinks, right? And it's important to keep validating that stink level between the systems you end up having, including Fishbowl and including QuickBooks, especially when you've got a multi-system environment that we work in. No one system is going to have all that picture, so it's important to take a look at that from an outside perspective. Maybe you do something in Excel, even though I don't like Excel that much. I think that could be a catchphrase for me is to kill Excel. But for these kind of like one-off scenarios where you got to check if something's working and make sure that you aren't taking your inventory for granted, you do need to run through that and see if it's healthy or not. Because Fishbowl is not necessarily going to know whether you've put in all your transactions correctly compared to what you are spending on a credit card in QuickBooks. Right? That happens all the time, and we could talk all day long about that sort of stuff. So let's just move on to the next one. Challenge number 4. This is one I call the manual trap. And the manual trap to me is, I understand that a lot of companies do something manual at first, all the time. We're ILCs working to create a store on Shopify for our products. And we know that we're going to be doing some of the sale fulfillment and licensing and things like that and set up manually. So I get that. I really do. It's like your first sales order, you're going to do it manually. Your first PO, you're going to do it manually. Your first manufacturing, you're going to do it manually. But I think a lot of companies and a lot of teams don't have a reference as to when they should automate it, right? And let me try an idea for the audience and see if this will work. And you guys tell me. Send us an email, put a comment on our pages, whether you guys agree with this or not. So here's my opinion. I say do it manual, but you got to document it, right? What is right, what is wrong, but then automate as quickly as possible. If at any time when you're doing the manual steps, you're getting errors. And because at some point there's just not an infinite amount of discipline that people have, right? Yeah, Josh, you and I talked about this about employees, right?
Yeah.
The water cooler, right? Probably the biggest killer of productivity apart from Excel. I'm kidding. Maybe not. And a company, because it's distracting. And when you've got a manual process that takes 15 steps to complete right, and you've forgotten step 10 and 11, it takes a whole lot of time to go back and troubleshoot how that happened. And then you're going to end up with the same outcome of like, yeah, we missed a step, and cleaning that up takes a long time. So that's where the manual trap comes into play, because you'll do things manually and then you'll have errors, and then by that point you're already trapped, right? And the only way to get out of it is to automate it so that you get your people's time back, so they can focus on the things that actually add value, which is, servicing your customers well and finding new ideas or being more analytical, right? And the manual trap is really a trap, because I've seen a lot of companies, they say, oh, we'll do it manually for now, but they don't have a timeline for themselves to say like, okay, once the water rises to this level, we've got to drain. Yeah. We got to drain it out.
I've always looked at it in a similar way, but I would tell people that look at the cost, look at your employees' cost, and document how long it takes you to do it manually. And once it gets to a point, and then find out how much it's going to cost to automate it. And once it gets to the point where the manual is going to cost just as much as the automation, do that. But it's at the same time, shouldn't automate too early, because before you have the process really properly documented, it's really important to make sure that's correct and the procedure's working. But then you can also take into account the errors and say, okay, even if it's the same cost, the automation is going to work without errors. The manual has errors, so that brings down the efficiency. That brings down the efficiency as well of the model. So that does make sense. But then I think having a manual backup for automation
100%.
is a great idea, because what if the automation goes down and your programmer's out of town? Always have a manual backup. Never just jump to automation without having some way to do it if you get stuck.
Yeah, there's some automations where the task is so difficult that not one person can deal with it, and once you automate it, it has to work For example, if you don't get your bank feed, are you going to go immediately give up and pull PDFs? Mm-hmm. You probably just wait a little longer to get your bank feed working in your accounting package before you go to the PDF route or, God forbid, a paper route.
Right.
I still have companies who get paper statements and they scan them, and then that's how they reconcile their bank. Mm. They don't do electronic bank feeds. Wow. And I think that's crazy. Anyway, let's move on.
Worse than Excel.
Josh, so this is one I came up with. Mm-hmm. And number 3, not having a process picture, mm-hmm. right? And what do I mean by a process picture? Well, just a flow chart, right? When this happens, this person does this, that has this effect, that goes into here, then eventually we see that in, QuickBooks or something, right? But having a written out procedure is nice and all, but having a broad picture of where things are going helps quite a bit, because just from a training perspective, because I think a lot of companies are really unwilling to make changes in their operations because they don't have a clear picture of where things are going. And when they bring new people on, it takes a lot of time to explain everything. Like it's not a fault of Fishbowl that companies have turnover, right? They'll have natural turnover, and we're not in a place where we've got, every small business employee has Fishbowl experience, or even Fishbowl experience to the level that you can drop them into a purchasing department or a manufacturing department. They know what to do. They still need to know your process that you apply on top of Fishbowl, right? Accounting is a bit interesting, because I think accounting is the same for most companies. They have their own procedures, right? but there's not a lot of whole creativity you can do with a bank feed. You know what I mean?
Right.
You don't want one, right? But with manufacturing or receiving or purchasing, there's procedures that you got to follow. Having that something like a diagram or even just a single document, it's like here, this is the cycle of things, can really help. And Josh, you got the next one.
Number 2, not having a test environment. So that one, okay, so that's the two part, right?
Yeah.
Basically, what we're saying is it's really important for 2 reasons, to have a test environment. Initially, when you're getting started, I think for me, when I started with Fishbowl, I would just connect to a QuickBooks file, import everything, or just do a bunch of orders, export, and then hope that it was right. But actually understanding, and by breaking down, this is what I would suggest. My suggestion is create a brand new Fishbowl test file, a brand new QuickBooks test file is the first thing you do. Put one purchase order in to Fishbowl. Export, see what happens. Does anything actually flow to QuickBooks? No? Okay, let's do the next thing. Receive it. What happens there? Fulfill it. What does that mean? Well, let's see what happens in QuickBooks. Now, every time you run a P&L or a balance sheet, or both, you can see, what did that order cost me? Instead of having to filter out of 100 and go, well, I think this did okay. And then you can truly understand. So if you're not really sure what happens with a sales order, what goes into QuickBooks, now you can see, well, now one customer was created. I have one invoice that was created in QuickBooks, and I have a journal entry. Now I know, oh, okay, that's how that works. Then you can use that as a frame of reference to look at the wiki in Fishbowl and realize, okay, how does this work? What is it doing? What if I were to do this thing? What if I were to make a mistake? What happens then? This gives you a really good core understanding so that when you have hundreds of items come in, you know what anomalies to look for. So you're not just kind of trusting and saying, hey, I hope it's okay. On the opposite, on the continuing side, once you've understood it and you're using Fishbowl, you might have questions all the time and say, oh, I hope I'm doing this right. And you're worried about expanding, you're worried about trying new things. I think having that test environment always available is a great idea, because it basically means that rather than worry about it or just hope for the best, cross your fingers, you can test it really quickly and it's not a big deal. I even would suggest keeping like a private computer or something that's not connected at all to your server, instead of connecting, turning your server off and going to a test environment back and forth. That gets a little tricky. What if you're accidentally in the wrong one? I would say put it on a separate computer. Have a computer that's not connected where you just run test options. Sometimes you have things that are actually in Fishbowl, so you can just back up your Fishbowl file on the server, restore it onto a local computer, and then just say, okay, what happens if I were to actually go through this and do this then and start doing, my landed cost this way? What would that do? And then you can see it. It doesn't have to take a long time. The whole test can take a few minutes. And most of the things you won't need to have up-to-date information anyway. So I think that's a really important way, because for me, without an accounting background in the beginning, without an inventory background, coming into this as somebody who just needed it, I was always very overwhelmed by this stuff. And for me, it really broke down, okay, now I understand what's going on. It was the first time I was able to truly understand what was happening.
Right. I think also for let me speak a little bit to the software dev in me, having an environment that mimics what the customer data has and the history of their transactions and just the nature of their business, and writing a software against that same understanding makes software so much better. Right. I can't tell you how many times where we thought we knew that we could just get away with the Bicycles Unlimited or trial database in Fishbowl, and it turns out like that was a bad idea. That was a tactical mistake, because we look at all these. The software works. It just doesn't work well for that customer, because now we're using that customer's database. We're seeing, errors and things like that, and it becomes a lot riskier to create new projects, because we can't confidently test or give the customer a way to test without risk a new solution that we might give them, right? And I think that's the for challenge number 2. The main point is, by not having a test environment, you give yourself a reason to reduce your confidence in the systems that you have, because you can't just go out and test it. I have a customer right now who doesn't have a test environment, And I've been asking them to talk to their IT company to set up a whole new computer environment where we could set one up. Because in the end, like, we need this, they need it. I've even offered to them to, like, hey, we'll even cloud host it for you, but it's just going to cost you more. And like, no, our IT company's going to do it, and it hasn't happened, you know? And it makes it difficult because sometimes when I go on site, it's like, gosh, I don't have a test environment. I'm going to be very careful,
Right.
you know? But I do have to cowboy it at sometimes because we don't have one.
Typically, I'll use my personal laptop, like my own business laptop. I'll say, okay, you know what? You back up your Fishbowl, back up your QuickBooks, and everything we do, I use my computer as like the test for everything we do first before going through it. Of course, when you're on site, that does slow things down a little bit. But,
it does, and that's probably a little bit of the trade balance of, like, you know, we're going to set up a test environment on my laptop, but then I can't leave it with them.
Yeah.
You know, what am I going to do? Leave them a laptop? And I think at some point, some of these engagements, I might just say, like, oh, you don't have a test environment? Okay, you're buying a laptop as part of the engagement so that you have a test environment that we can work with.
Yeah.
That you can go to a conference room, boot it up, and test our solutions with you.
Sure.
Anyway, that's an idea. I'm not doing that yet. That's not in the customer guide. But, okay, so challenge number 1, I feel like could be controversial.
Ooh.
We'll see.
Good.
Reports.
Okay.
So let's talk about reports and data and business intelligence. The thing I think Fishbowl's had a challenge in solving for a very long time, and I think everyone's got an opinion of how to solve that. But before we talk about that, let's go pick on somebody else a little bit, because I think people have customers, partners, everyone in this ecosystem has this opinion that if they only did the exact same thing as QuickBooks for their reporting, Fishbowl would be better. If they only took the same functionality and tools out of NetSuite, it would be better. And I'm picking on them because they're the big and expensive system right now. You know, if you wanted to get a quote for NetSuite, I think the essentials. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to say a price because maybe they'll actually. Let's just say it's thousands of dollars a month, right? A month. Whereas Fishbowl is a one-time purchase and an annual renewal, which is a lot cheaper, right? But you think a system like NetSuite, a cloud ERP system, would have a solution for any and all reports, and that's usually the assumption, right? But I spent enough time around NetSuite. I'm actually in a NetSuite Fishbowl to NetSuite project right now, and again, you'd think it'd all be pretty straightforward. And yes, there is a way for you to build your own report by clicking and things like that. But on the flip side, I've got a customer who does 3PL inventory for a medical firm, and the 3PL warehouse has NetSuite, and we've been asking them for, like months now, for clean inventory activity, so we can reconcile that in the biomeds Fishbowl system, so that they can do their cost accounting correctly, they pay their bills correctly, and it's been difficult. And they have a dedicated NetSuite administrator whose job is to run that, and it's even challenging there. So they've got a bigger system, they've got a person dedicated to that, and they still can't get it right. Other thing is that, I've also looked at the marketplace just because I was curious, and there's a whole cottage industry of business intelligence professionals supporting companies with their data needs for NetSuite. So it's not, a lot of the problems is not necessarily the platform, even though that I do believe Fishbowl could do better on certain things, but that's another day's podcast. But let's talk about how companies today could use Fishbowl as effectively as they could. We want to talk about the challenges, but we also want to talk about solutions, right? So here's how you can help a little more on that. We all know that the what I call the legacy report system, the one where it basically looks like a PDF on screen. Exporting that to Excel has been a pain, right? And the reason is that when it exports to Excel, it tries to export it so that you could reprint it from Excel, like the actual paper layout. And that's not what an accountant needs. They want the data, or a staff accountant, they want the data in Excel that they can do their pivoting, their slicing and dicing, and get their analysis quickly, right? So when Fishbowl implemented the data module some years ago, I believe it was in 2016 or 2017, I'm dating myself now, the data module allows you to write and execute SQL statements. And SQL is SQL, or Structured Query Language, which is a type of computer programming, and I don't want to lose the entire audience, but SQL is not that scary. You can do a lot with it, but it's not that bad. When we're talking about NetSuite, when you're going into the report builder, it's building SQL for you. And it's returning the results that you can see on screen easily. That's great. The problem is, and why we were also having a problem with the NetSuite 3PL, was that the way that they build the queries isn't necessarily what you really want, right? You still need somebody with the skill to write a query in the most effective way possible. For example, this is my favorite example. You've got a PO, right? You want to see how much is open on that PO. Well, you think that you go start from the PO data, go to the PO item data, and then you go to the receipt item data and put it all together, because in those three places, you've got the PO number, the part number on the PO item, and the quantity that was ordered. And then at the receipt table, you'd see which lines were received, right? Well, what do you do when you've got multiple receipts, right? A lot of these query building solutions, either don't know, or it becomes a little more difficult to consistently handle this when you've got a many-to-many situation, right? So what was happening with the NetSuite 3PL was that they'd give us receiving data, but it was duplicated because of other things, right. And it became really difficult for us to reconcile between what is the original record versus what is a duplicate. So we had to spend a lot of time cleaning that up in order to make it useful for a Fishbowl transaction. Right. And that's where the automated SQL that you would get from NetSuite or these other platforms. I'm picking on NetSuite, but it's not just NetSuite. Great Plains has it. Other ERP systems have it, where you can click and drag and build your reports. They work, but they have a limit to the structure of the information, and having access to the SQL query to make a more finessed SQL statement that can give the accounting team exactly what they're looking for without any interpretation, right, makes it a lot more practical. And that's where I think, and in NetSuite, you have to pay extra to even get that. With Fishbowl, you already have it. So on that matter, you're paying for features that are way cheaper, already included in Fishbowl as a platform, versus NetSuite, which is a closed software ecosystem. You're not going to get access to the database unless you pay money to get access to it. But with Fishbowl, you can. So I would implore customers to take a look at the data module. When we have our store ready, which I believe by the time this podcast episode will come out, the store will be there, store.israellopezconsulting.com. And on the store, you'll find free SQL queries, some paid ones, because we got to pay the bills here, where you can just copy and paste and run them, right? And get the data that you're looking for quickly and easily. And we'll probably have another podcast on talking about every kind of report you could do in Fishbowl, what kind of analysis, third-party tools, things like that. We'll get there someday. But for the purposes of finding a challenge and solving it, I think customers should take a look at the data module, use it more often. It's kind of a marker for our customers, because customers are typically more informed and have more confidence in their system once they've gotten the data that they're looking for, that they're used to seeing in an easy to use, self-managed way. It may not be entirely easy for them to edit the SQL, but I've been happily surprised by a lot of the inventory managers, purchasing specialists, even salespeople who've taken a query that I've left behind with them, and I come back and it's been altered a little bit to give them what they're looking for. And I thought that was really cool. Mm-hmm. So a lot of companies, some people just need a query by example. They can just go from there. Okay. But anyway, that's reports. those are the 5 challenges. I think we've talked enough. We're nearly towards the end of our typical runtime. Let's do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll wrap up. So this week we'll be interviewing, having some more interviews. Simon, our previous guest, will come back, and we'll be talking to some other business people with their stories, their lesson learned. So please stay tuned. And I think that's it from us today. So whether you have $1 million in revenue or 100, the challenges are all the same, and we're here to help you get through it. From the offices of Josh in New York City, thank you for joining us. You guys have a good one.